did that to help share history of Sterling Forest. Now, let me start here. My talk is about the chain that saved the colonies. This was my grandfather and grandmother. My grandfather loved history. That's where I got this history disease. And what was cool about Grandpa, he was an engineer on a Hudson engine. And I grew up in Dumont. Everybody know where Dumont is? Dumont, New Jersey? Okay. And there's my dad, who would be handing messages to the engineers. He worked in the switching tower. We had rail passes. And we would jump on the train, or I'd get in the engine with my grandfather, and we would go to places and jump out. So anything within 250 miles of Dumont, we were able to go to on rail. Now, Dumont, up at the top of the hill, is a monument. And we used to go up there, and that's Camp Merritt. That is where Camp Merritt was, which is where the troops went for World War I. I would go there a lot. They had army tanks from World War I, and my mother loved to play with them. So I got to see many, many old things. My dad loved history too. The family really got into history. And so anything that we could get on the train and go to, we would go to. And here's Gettysburg. And my dad was very curious about things. Good thing it wasn't loaded. Tower of Victory, went to many times. Mystic Seaport, Trophy Point. This is the first time I went to Trophy Point. That's up at West Point, and my mother took me and stood me on a piece of a cannon. And my grandmother gave me this picture, and it's amazing. When I got the picture, I went, wow, I remember that now. But very cool. I loved history. I would read books, do puzzles, and also I loved nature. I would collect butterflies and mount them, and I entered a show, an insect collection show in 1959 and won first prize.
Congratulations.
When I got my driver's license, I drove up to any historic site, and this was Sterling Forest, which was not too far from my home. I had been there on rail with my parents driving through Sterling Forest, but I had heard that there was a furnace there, so I went and drove around. I took this picture. Started researching history. The first iron ore was discovered in Sterling Forest in 1736. Who's been to Sterling Forest? Oh, what a great place. The Grenville orogeny, which happened thousands and thousands of years ago, is when tectonic plates were moving on the Earth's surface. And North America and South America tectonic plate collided and squished together and made a mountains area. But the pressure melted all of the minerals inside of the Earth. And veins were created of magnetite, that's iron ore. So going through Sterling Forest, I found this vein. That goes down about a quarter mile. And if you look at it, it's all crystals because the magnetite had been melted together. Very cool. So if you walk around Sterling Forest and see this, don't chip it away because they'll come after you. They do have a camera near it. Harvesting it, they would start miners would start chipping away and follow the vein down into the earth. And you can see here's the magnetite vein that they're following down. They would take and put it in baskets and put it in wagons, and then they would sell that iron to blacksmiths. So here's a piece of magnetite. Now it's 70% iron and 30% other minerals. They would heat it up in a fire, and the blacksmith would beat it, but look at the 30% of other material. They had to be very careful about that. Then they built a bloomery in 1738. This is where they would have a fire, and they would take the pieces of ore and basically cook it in the fire. And then they would have pieces of it where the impurities would have come out of it. And there are sections in Sterling Forest where you can walk around and find these. They would then take those and heat them at the bloomery, beat them, and when they were done, you would have magnetite pure. So I took this piece and I cut it to show you it's iron. They got rid of all of the impurities at the bloomery. Then the blacksmith would take it, heat it, and make things out of it. A new industry started, charcoaling. They would build a triangle-type chimney in the middle, and each of the logs were about 4 feet high. They would stack them like that. Then they would coat it with sod, and then put dirt on it, then light it. And that would smolder. It had to be kept pretty much away from the oxygen, so it would slowly burn. It would burn for about a week. Now, if you ever walk around Sterling Forest, you may see a half circle of stone. That is where the colliers would live. There would be 2 colliers. Each man would do a 12-hour shift. They would walk from pile to pile, making sure that it didn't open up. Because if it opened up, the wood would burn. You were basically roasting the wood to make charcoal. When it was done, they would rake off the top, put it in baskets, and then bring it to the furnaces, and they would use the charcoal in the furnace to heat the magnetite. I always thought this was the boss. England petitioned the colonies to make pig iron in 1750. English sent many people over here. They showed the colonies how to make blast furnaces. You would have a stream, so you would have water running to the water wheel. The water wheel would turn and run the bellows, and you would load the top with limestone, magnetite, and charcoal. The limestone would melt first, and then when the iron melted, it would flow down to the bottom of the furnace, and all the other impurities would float on top of it. Pretty cool. 2 bellow nozzles going into the fire. There were 2 pipe systems in. The top pipe, they would open that and out would come slag. Slag is the 30% impurities, which was liquid at the time. That would float on top of the magnetite because the iron is much heavier. Then they would open the second port and they would make a long line called the sow, and then off of it would be the pig iron. And this was the product. The first blast furnace of Sterling Forest was built in 1751. This is what it looked like before and now. And the limestone kiln, because you had to bake the limestone to get the moisture out of it. You wouldn't want to throw that into the 3,000-degree fire. New rules came from England. Nothing is to be made from the iron in the colonies. All pig iron is to go to England. Now in Sterling, at Belleville, they had built a forge. 1745 is when the forge was built. In 1750, England closed it down. Now, I went to Sterling Forest with my dad. The railroad ran through the park, and we used to go through there, and we used to hike all through that area. When City Investing was trying to buy the property, they wanted to build 16,500 houses at Sterling Forest. Well, having hiked through the forest and seen many, many things, they contacted me and asked me the history of it, and we talked about it. They were not able to buy the park, not because of me, but because people realized the history of it, because I did talk to a lot of people. And they started calling me Doc Payne. Well, I went to the park when it was being built. The state finally bought the property, and I went there as a volunteer, and then they made me a park ranger, which was great. And I would do hikes all through the park, and on the hike at the Sterling Furnace, someone said, "Hey Doc, where's the Sterling Forge that was built in 1767? I went, huh? There's no forges here. I didn't know anything about a forge. I only knew that the British had stopped that. Made me start thinking of research then. The second furnace was built in 1777. They tore down the first one and made this one bigger. And if you go to the site and walk around the area where the furnace is, you'll see this is where the water wheel was for the furnace 1, and this is for furnace 2. The water ran the water wheel, and this was the casting room where they would cast pig iron. On a group, we were walking through the area, and I said, "This is the furnace that made the pig iron for the Great Chain at West Point in 1778. And that's what the furnace looked like at that time. They had taken the top off of it. And all the kids went, "Huh? What chain?" I said, "The West Point chain." None of the kids knew about it. Turns out it wasn't on the test. That's one of 4 driving forces that are making me do this presentation, because I want to educate the people about the chain, because that chain saved America. Anybody been here? The Archives of the United States of America in Washington, a great place to learn history. When I got there at 8:30, the door was shut. Look at the size of those doors. I put my camera on the top step to get this picture. But 9 o'clock, they opened the doors and we could go in. Went inside. When you walk straight in, there's the Declaration of Independence on display. If you walk to the right, there's a door that goes downstairs to the archives. If you go there now, the door's on the side of the building. But I went down because I heard this place has all the documentation of America. And it was this nice lady, and I said, "Where can I find out information about the West Point chain?" She went, "What?" I said, "Sterling Forest." She goes, "Oh, Sterling Forest. Well, you can go downstairs into the history area, and sections 7 and 8 will have boxes of binders, and you can go through it, and documentation's all in there." I said, "Okay." And she goes, "Here, take this pad, and if you see anything, write it down, and we'll make copies of that for you at $5 a page." So I found a lot of information, and I got it, and that started more research. Back to Sterling Forest, Sterling Lake. And from the foot of the visitor center, the front door, I took a compass right there, and I walked every 5 degrees till I was out of the park system. It took me a year, because I had to do it on my days off, because I was working at the park. Also, an archaeological dig was being done by City Investing, because they were going to try to make it a historic site so that it would attract people, and then maybe they could get the land and build their 16,500 houses. There's an old pig that he had found, and they did that for about a month. And then I heard about that, and I found out that up in Walden, he had a book that was in the Walden Library. So, couldn't wait to get there. Went to the library, and they had a whole section of history of Sterling Forest, which he had done. Went through all of that, made lots of copies, and I found this map. And there is the Sterling Pond, and right at the base of it was the furnace. But then there was the forge. There wasn't supposed to be a forge, but Roland Robbins had marked a forge site. Aha, I know that spot. From doing the compass walk, I remember going there, and there were logs in the rocks and in the water. I started exploring that, and I found 2 rectangles of rocks, and that was a cribbing dam. Here's how it looks. So you see those rectangles on each side of the brook? That's where the trip hammer was that would take the chain. I mean, make pieces of chain. See, the pig is shaped like this, curved. At this site, they would make it square so they could make it. I found that piece of metal in the brook and dug rocks away from it and dug it up and found this. That's the site where there was a water wheel. I found the Sterling Forge in 2008 where the great chain was made. The gudgeon would have been this piece. There would have been 2 gudgeons in each in the logs of the water wheel. So that's the site where the trip hammer was. I convinced the park that we should bring that to the visitor center, and the park manager, Jeff Hudson, allowed us to bring it there. So if you go to Sterling Forest, you'll see the gudgeon there on the floor. And I also found an old ore car in another mine. So that is there on the floor. I was awarded this by the director of the parks for finding the forge, because no one had known where the forge was since the Revolutionary War. And by doing the compass, I found it. Then I heard about Saugus Ironworks, so I went up to Saugus, another great place to visit if you're into this stuff. 1647, they built a furnace, and in 1650, they built a forge. So you could make pig iron and bring it to the forge, and there's a pig. Now, at Sterling, the trip hammer would take the pig and make it square, depending on what you're going to make. If you're going to make a shovel, you would leave the end on it so you can flatten that out. This is trip hammer. I asked them how it worked, and they said, "Come with me," and they turned it on for me. They set the water wheel going. Now, could you imagine holding a pig on a big pair of pliers, making it square, or making other products? Now, the base of this, you see the anvil underneath? And the support, this is what I found at the site. And there's the trip hammer next to it. Anybody do Photoshop? Well, if you take a picture, you can highlight it. And there's the trip hammer and the forge site. On the hill behind it, I found these loops. They were the iron straps around wagon wheels. And it was next to a whole pile of charcoal, because they were using charcoal to run that site. And blooms. I found 57 artifacts. Now here's a typical forge site where you would heat up the pig to make things out of it. If you were to dig in the bottom of it, you would find a piece that's curved, which was the bottom of the forge. Found pieces of pig iron, and this is a cooling stone. If you're working with something and you get it too hot, it would go eh. So you lay it down on the cooling stone until it gained the temperature, and then you would bring it back. Now what's amazing is a furnace took 4 acres of wood a week. So they would cut 4 acres of trees to make the charcoal for 1 week. So that's why Sterling Forest had no trees. Now, another great place to go is the Charlottesburg site, which is in New Jersey. And at that site, they had done research, and this is what a forge would have looked like. The building, and you see there's 2 streams of water coming through it, and inside that would be turning water wheels, so you would have trip hammers and forge sites. 1778, help us needed. There's our flag at the time. Why was a chain needed? The British were coming down from Canada and the Great Lakes, in from the ocean. They wanted to take the New England area and make it England, part of England, so the king could control that. So their ships were coming down, invading all of New England. But they had to go, send ships up the Hudson River to supply the troops with munitions and food. So if a chain was put there, that would stop the British. George Washington asked Peter Townsend if he would make a chain at Sterling Forest and put it across the river to stop the British from supplying their troops. Now here's something cool. Here's the document from George Washington to Peter Townsend to make the chain. My mother found that. And she had a copy of it. Very cool. I have now donated it to Albany. Sterling Forest worked around the clock from February to April to make the chain. Iron came from the Sterling mine, which was discovered in 1750. Here's Sterling Lake. And the visitor center is down in this area. And that's where the mine was. And furnace. If you go to this site, you don't see it anymore, but those beams go down and ore cars will go down into the ground. All that's left is the base of those beams, and that's where the mine was. But City Investing, who was trying to get the property, bulldozed the site and closed the mine. The Long Mine, which was over here, those 2 mines had the purest magnetite. That's why they were using them. And another great place to explore, you go down and down, and they left columns of magnetite so that it wouldn't cave in. So there's magnetite, you see magnetite, magnetite, and a column. And they harvested all of that. It goes down about 200 feet, and it's flooded now. On the left is the slag, the waste rocks from carving it out. And I was down there taking a picture, I went, ooh. I I don't think I'm alone in here. But can you imagine what life was like then? Who was your friend? See, Britain had said all the pig iron is to go to England. You cannot have a forge. But in order to make the chain, Peter Townsend built a secret forge 2.5 miles from the furnace. And he built 17 forge sites. Now, once the chain was made, they started shipping things, but then it snowed. They had 4 feet of snow. And what they had done at the forge sites, they would take the pig, make it square, heat it up, then bend this piece like this at an angle at the end, bend the other side like this with an angle, and then put them in a pile. The next group would put a link together, weld it shut. Then those would be put in a pile, so it went down the line until they had 10 links together with the last link open. Then they put the 10 links on the group of 10 links together, and they sent it up to the Brewster Forge, up through New Jersey. Here they stopped at Peter Townsend's house, overnighted, and continued up to the Brewster Forge, which is another secret forge. And that's where they put 10 links together, 20, 30, 40, 50. And as they put them together, they would put them on logs. This is the site of the Brewster Forge. Number 2 of making me decide to do this presentation. That sign that talks about the site of the Brewster Forge disappeared. Nobody knew where it was. It was just gone. But the Daughters of the Revolution put this plaque up at the site where the Brewster Forge was, with the parts of the chain thrown across the Hudson River was made at this site. Now, this is the river. Remember Irene? Number 3. This is the road, this is the river. That's where the forge was. That's where the forge was. Irene just washed down that river and took everything away. I went to the site and I saw those logs sticking out of the bank, and that would have been these type of logs. And there would have been an anvil here. In front of it, I did find the anvil. And I put that in my presentation, I talked about it. And also the bridge that was there was washed out. And that took about 5 years to repair. So here's what the river looked like. Remember these rocks? There they are now. And the whole bank's gone. The forge was on the right-hand side. I got a call from somebody from the Edmonston house. Another great place. You get a chance to go to see that. They asked me if I knew anything about the Great Chain. And I went, yeah. And they said, could you come here? We need to have some questions for you. So I went there, and they had the forge chain. From the forge, they had the anvil. I said, where did you get that? And they were like, it's here. I did go back to the site, and it was gone, but they had it. And they made this model. Show you how it worked. So the trip hammer would have been hitting that, and now they have it on display. But that's another great site. Anyway, from that forge site is when the chain was put together and brought down to the river and floated. There's West Point, Constitution Island. And you notice the river makes 2 90-degree turns. And it's 202 feet in the turn. The chain was placed on logs at that site, anchored, and floated on the logs. And then they built forts all around the site. There were 15 redoubts, so nobody could get near that chain. But now, if you're coming up the river, you would have to, big ships supplying the British with food and munitions were using the river, but they would have to stop here, drop the sails on the ship, because you can't make two 90-degree turns with the ship at that tight spot. And then we'd take two longboats and then hook them to the ship and row it around the turn, and then launch the sails and continue. But with the chain there, they couldn't do anything like that. With the forts, there's the firepower. You wouldn't want to stop your ship there. So that stopped the British from going north. So if you get a chance, West Point does tours of their forts. Really cool. I wouldn't want to been there if they were shooting. Constitution Island. It's where the chain was stretched across. So you look at the side, and right here is where the chain was anchored on Constitution Island. They do tours on Constitution Island, so you can check that out. Great place to walk. And they have pieces of the chain, except they're wood. They're reproductions. But it's great that they're showing it. But they do have 3 links of the chain attached to a rock. On the West Point side, in the cove, is where the chain was anchored over here. Somebody said to me, you know, Doc, the chain was made at Ringwood. I'm like, what? Yeah, the chain was made at Ringwood. I said, no, it wasn't. So anyway, that continued my investigation. So now, I found information about Fort Montgomery. Fort Montgomery had a chain before the West Point chain. And they needed a boom chain, so the chain was made in the other location. And here's a picture how the chain was at the site. Now the Great Chain had a boom chain, which was the one taken from Fort Montgomery. How big were the links? Now if you go to Trophy Point, they have the links, and I measured them. Look at number 1. 29, 28, 31, 29, 34. So about just under 3 feet. But now, look at these links. Look how they're square. Look at the corners. That's really important that you see that. That pig iron was made square. That's a swivel. A swivel was designed because at Fort Montgomery, the chain broke 3 times from tidal action and storms and flipping the logs. So at West Point, the logs could flip and it wouldn't break. And also they put in clevises. You could pull that pin, take the rod out, and open the chain for friendly troops, and then close it back. So that's up at West Point. The Great Chain Mystery. A few links of the chain were stretched across the Hudson to keep the British, and Roscoe Smith and Monroe boasted that he had links of the Great Chain till I got there. He donated the chain to Museum Village. And if you get a chance to go there, you can see the links of the, look at them close. What do you think? Is that the Great Chain? No. That's a cast chain that was cast. It's not perfectly square. Ringwood State Park boasted having links of the Great Chain till I got there. Here's their chain, and every link is exactly 46 inches long. And look how the corners are smooth. That was a Westminster Abbey chain. John Abbey was a collector, and he would find things and bring them to historic sites to sell them. He found that chain, which we'll talk about later, and brought it to those two sites, and they bought it, but it was not the West Point chain. Here's my search for the chain. Connecticut Historical Society has one link of the real chain. See how it's square? Worcester Historic Museum has one link of the chain. It is the real chain, square. Washington's headquarters has a link of the chain. Alice Austin, she was a photographer out in Staten Island. She helped start photography, and on her stove was a piece of the chain. So we had to go up there, went to Alice Austin's house. Another great place to go see. If you're into photography, most of what is in there is the history of photography. And her great-great-grandfather worked with Peter Townsend and got that chain link, which is on the stove on the left. And it turns out it was a swivel. I went there and look what I found. So this is the picture. When I got there, what? That's what was on the stove. I said, what happened to that? Nobody knew. Well, another historic site, Boscobel House. Go check that out. And if you look right there, there was links of a chain. And if you look close, it's a broken swivel. Well, that's how it looked when I came back. The first time I went there, it was covered with leaves and pine needles. While we were there, some guys picked it up and walked over and threw it on the lawn and came and blew all the leaves and everything away from the site. I went inside, I said, you can't do that to that. That's a historic thing. And they're like, who are you? Anyway, we went back there later in the summer, and now it's inside the building on a pedestal. So there's a broken link. Again, Doc Payne was there because I believe in saving history stuff. So that's how it really looked on the stove. And now it's in the museum. At the Redwood Library in Anthem, I found this picture. We went there and couldn't find it. There's a statue of George Washington over here. He now stands on the side of the building. I went in and I said to the lady at the front desk, where's the chain? She said, what chain? More research. Here's the picture I found showing George Washington in front of the building, and there's links of the chain. So now George is on the side of the building, but where the chain was, it's gone. But there are two holes in the wall where it's attached. Here's another picture I found, and I went back in that time and said, what happened to the swivel? Where is it? And that's where it was attached. And I said, where did it go? And I was told by the director, who wasn't there the first time, she said, it was a lot of work for the landscapers.
Oh.
They kept getting covered and plants growing, so we put it on loan to the Artillery Company in Newport in 2005. Another great place to visit, the Artillery Company, Newport. You go inside, and they have historic items from both sides of the war. So when you walk in, There's the chain on the left side that was donated to them. I asked the director if I could straighten it out. He said, okay, so now it looks like this, so you can see it's a swivel better. There's the director of the museum. And my wife and a friend of ours who would go on hiking with us. So if you go to this museum, you can see artifacts from the British and American. Both sides have artifacts here. It's a great place. Washington Monument, Metham, Massachusetts. They have links of a chain. But look at it. Is that square? That's a cast iron chain. And after my visit, this appeared, mistakenly thought. Chicago Historic Society. They said the chain that stopped the British. We went to look at that. They would drive around with it, and now it's laid on the street for a while, and now it's in the bushes behind the building because it's not square. Forest Lawn, Freedom Court, they have links of a chain. And here they talk about it, but they don't say it's the West Point chain, because if you look at it really close, look at it. It's a cast chain, it's not a square chain. Dr. Mullen's collection, found at an antique shop. This is part of a swivel, which it really is. And he did have part of the chain. And up in Danbury, there's another link. Smithsonian Institute found this advertisement of it, but when we went there, nobody knew what happened to it. The Townsend home in Oyster Bay. This is where Peter Townsend grew up. But during the Revolution, the British took it as headquarters for their troops. Behind it, there were two links, and I say these links are part of the chain which was used to span the Hudson River. I looked at it and I said to them, that's not the chain. And they said, well, what are you talking about? Well, I said, I'm Doc Payne. And that's not the real chain. So if you go there now, supposedly it's to span the Hudson. The sign is gone, but the links are still there because it's not the real chain. Coast Guard Museum. Anybody from the Coast Guard? I'll find somebody one day. They have links of the chain cast by Peter Townsend out in front of the building. Look at it real close. And what they do is that link that looks like it's hooked on, they hide that and give clues, and every year the class has to go find it. It's not the real chain. Otillo's building in Paterson, New Jersey. Another place that talk about having the great chain. Uh-oh. I'm not popular there either. I said, that is not the great chain. What? Where did it come from? More research. Remember these ships in the harbor?
Yeah.
Look at that. And this is the plaque for where the ships were, and if you look at the base, it's an anchor chain. Each one is about 12 inches long. Found an article, the Statue of Liberty had two links of the chain. We went there, here they talked about it. It was for a demonstration when British came later on, and it's gone. Nobody knows where it went. Up at West Point, another great museum. Inside there, when you go in the front door, you go to the right, and there's links of the great chain. I went over and looked at them and everything, and I found out, I said I had a hiking group there, and I said, you see that chain? It's made of wood. It's not the real chain, it's the reproduction. From the other side of the room I heard, "Doc, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't say it. That's not wood. It's styrofoam." So he was cool, but he just didn't like the fact that I was saying it wasn't the real chain. But it sure looks like it. Fort Putnam, another great place to go, West Point. In the middle there is a history building. You go inside, they have some reproductions of the chain. West Point, they have links of the real chain. And if you look at Trophy Point, out in the water is an island. You can go on tours here. That's Bannerman's Island, another great place for a tour. He was collector and seller of historic munition stuff, and this is his castle, Bannerman's area. If you needed a cannon, he had lots of them. Westminster Abbey sold him some links of his chain, and Bannerman cut them to make paperweights. But this is a great example. That's not a square chain. This is a cast chain that would have cast the iron. So the chain stretched across the river Hudson was not Westminster Abbey. It was made in Wales. And it was an armatorial buoy chain placed across the harbor by the British. They used it in the harbor to anchor their ships, so that chain, Westminster Abbey chain, was made in England. So the Townsend chain and the Erskine chain, and I found documentation proving that Ringwood did make the boom chain. A British floating derrick, a bishop floating derrick raised links of the crane of the boom chain, 1855. One of them went to Washington's headquarters. So this is the boom chain, because what happened at the end of the war, they took the chain out and they just cut the boom chain and it fell down. So if you go to Washington's headquarters, you can see that. Bear Mountain, in their historic area, they had two links of the chain, and it turned out to be the Fort Montgomery chain. Fort Montgomery had two links of the chain, which they talked about their chain. Whoops. Stony Point Museum had links of the chain, which they donated to Fort Montgomery, and they were a boom chain, not the West Point. Trailside Museum at Bear Mountain had a link of the chain, which they talked about being the Fort Montgomery chain. And this is an anchor, how they would have drilled a hole in the rocks, and that would have held the chain. But it's a reproduction of the Fort Montgomery chain, not a real chain. So Washington's headquarters in Newburgh and Fort Montgomery site now have this chain, which is a real link of the Fort Montgomery chain. New York Historic Society in New York, a great place, they have two links of the Fort Montgomery chain. What happened to the great chain? Governor's Island, 30 tons of it went there in 1829. That's Governor's Island down the bottom in the New York Harbor. They took the chain out and melted it down for iron cannon rails and castings. So at the West Point Foundry, they took the chain there, melted it, and they made cannons, and this whole system here was made from the chain. Trophy Point, little mystery here. Artifacts that were in the center of the chain links all different cannons and guns. I found all of these pictures. But if you go there today, it looks like this. I've asked at West Point, what happened to the cannons and the guns? And nobody can tell me. I'm sure they know, but they don't want to deal with Dr. Bayne. So Trophy Point is a great place to go. Albany Museum. Links of the chain given to the State Library in 1858 by General Franklin Townsend, grandson of Peter Townsend. So they have 3 links there on display. See, it's 2 hooked links. Uh-oh. 2 hooked links laying on top of the 3rd. Back to Sterling Forest. During the Revolution, this is what Sterling Forest looked like. Remember, 4 acres a week to make charcoal? Not many 200-year-old trees, but there are a couple. I love them. But today, from total destruction, this is Sterling Forest. If you get a chance, go visit Sterling Forest. The visitor center is great. Summer and winter, it's open. Lots of displays on the inside to show the details of the chain. This is the map. You push the buttons and the trails light up to show you if you want to go hiking. Frank Lautenberg donated the money to build the visitor center. So they named it the U.S. Senator Frank Lautenberg Visitor Center. I took Frank and the governor on many hikes. Frank's family, they loved history. Then to the left of the visitor center in a wooded area, his family came and planted trees. Now the trees are about this big, but very cool. Thanks, Frank. If it wasn't for him, we would not have had the visitor center. Great man. He was attacked by a bear. Number 4. This is the grand opening of the visitor center. The governor, Frank, cutting the ribbon, opening the visitor center. It was a great day. I saw Frank had this look on his face. I wanted to talk to him, and he said, well, you know, with that chain, they were going to get rid of it. Oh, what? We'll talk about that later, I said to him. 2016, park management came to the park when I started looking at the forge site. I took them on hikes. GS survey map of the site, which I did in 2017, shows the site of all the forges I found. Again, there were 17 forge fires, I found 15. My goal is to make that a National Historic Site. I'm working with Strata Archaeological Company, which the Friends of Sterling Forest hired for $28,000. And we went to the sites that I picked, didn't pick them, I found the site, we did the dig at each site, marked it on the map. In 2018 is when we actually did the digs, when the park gave us a permit to do the archaeological digs. Strata brought in a drone to fly over the area. At the end of the hot day, the iron in the ground was warmer than the rest, and you can see all those dots where there is iron. And almost every dot there turned out to be a forge I had found. Very cool. Here is a forge site. This square is where we found artifacts. We would put them on that plastic sheet at the top to save them. So here's the sites. Here's the bottom of the forge, which was shaped at a half curve. There was wood around the forge, and you see this piece. From working the forge, the sparks would come out and cover the wood. So you can see that's where the wood was together. Here's another forge. Another forge. Here's another forge. You see the square? Remember this rock. Oh, there it is. The forge is over here. We had to stop the dig. The water started flowing, and for about a year it covered everything in the stream. This was where the trip hammer was, up in this area. There's a cooling stone by the trip. Here's how it looks now. Our goal is to educate the people about the amazing history of this area. From where the mines were, the furnaces, the trip hammer, the routes that was taken, the fort, the West Point area, the chain. 2019 is when I was issued a permit. I went up to the Albany Museum, and those chain links disappeared. I said, what happened to them? And I was told they were donated. To who? Okay. I went up to where they said, New York State Museum, or New York State Library had them, but then the building burned down. This was inside, firemen putting the fire out. And then the state education building, another great place to visit, the links wound up there. After the library burned, they took them out and hung them on the wall here. There's the 3 links. The museum up in Albany sent many things over to the storage area at the Capitol, and those links then were moved from their location to the New York State Capitol, and there they stand in front of George. I wanted to see if they would give me the bottom link, not the ones hooked together, to bring to Sterling Forest and put in the visitor center, because that's where it was made. The director came out and said, no, but you know, there's another link you should go look at. I went, wow, let's go. So he took me down the block to the History of Art Museum. We went in there, and there is a single link with a diagram of where it was. And I wanted to see if they would let us have that link. I want to bring the chain home, because it just lays underneath the 2, and I would love to put that in the visitor center on the main beam over the display. But they said no. After a year of pause, they said no. Well, I went out and designed a trail. This is the trail of the forge sites. I GPSed it, made a map. We had an Eagle Scout volunteer come, and he built those steps. So when you go there, you can climb down these steps and start walking. And if you look here, this is the giant rock. The trip hammer was over here in the brook, and you see this rock steps they built. I wanted to build a railing around that rock, because when you get to the edge, it's at an angle, and if it rains, you'll fall right off into the brook. So I think it's too dangerous for that. So I went to the director of the parks. I said, can we drill holes and put a fence up there? I said, 2 other sections up at Bear Mountain, they have done that already. I want to do this to the site so that they don't fall down. Here's part of the cribbing dam, and the trip hammer was here where the pig iron was made into the chain squares, and I was told, no, you can't drill holes in historic rock. So that's gone. So there's another section down the trail where we put these rocks so you can at least walk down the area. We put steps in. We want to put this in, but they said, no, we can't do that. So I said, how about if we put crossing like this? I went to Orange and Rockland, and they said they would give me 3 telephone poles to do this. But the park said no. So remember number 2? The sign was taken by an Eagle Scout, redone, repainted, and now it's back at the site. So I wish they had told us they were going to do that, but the Eagle Scout did that, so now that's back at the site. And he also cleaned the daughter's plaque. So the sign is back for the Brewster Forge. And that chain stopped the British from invading America. If we didn't have that chain put there across the river, we'd probably all be speaking English. Pursuit, does thou understand it, how I speak it? So, I want to make this a National Historic Site. The Friends of Sterling Forest are working on that. We finally cleaned all the artifacts. I have 20 5-gallon buckets of artifacts in my garage, which are cleaned, photoed, measured, and weighed. We've taken that, and I've made a binder. I took all the pictures that I took of the site, the artifacts, stuff that you haven't even seen here, because every site I could take a lot of pictures, printed 3 of each picture to make 3 volumes, or 3 copies. Made one, which is 450 pages, of all the history, and I've given that to Strata Archaeological Company. He's going to put information into it. When we get that back, I'll make copies of his information and make the 3 volumes. Then go to People's Island up in Albany to make it a National Historic Site, because that saved America. And thanks for listening. Any questions?
Doc, I'm surprised to hear you say that the Smithsonian Institute does not have any link. And I think you said they hadn't, but they have misplaced them, or they say they don't know where they are?
Don't know where they are. Some historic sites do have single ones.
Yeah.
So I kind of guess that's what happens, but nobody will admit.
Did you
Yes.
say how many links there were in the original chain, so I forget?
1800.
Wow.
1,800
Yeah,
links?
yeah. No, 870. 870. Yeah,
Thank you.
cool.
Do you think any of them were sunk so that they were at the bottom of the Hudson?
No, they did take all the chain, which they took most of it and they cast it.
There are other kilns throughout Sterling Forest and Harriman Forest, Bear Mountain Forest. Were any of those used towards this chain, do you think?
No. The forge that made
When
the
I was
chain,
in high school, I was taught that the one at Kanawaki was part of it. I went to North Rockland, and they swore that the one in Kanawaki was also one of the ones that built.
I'll have to check that out. I did say, but nobody had any information there, so,
It was a long time ago.
yeah.
Nobody would be alive to tell
I think Kanawaki had a forge where they would make the pig iron piece. And then that would come to Sterling, to the forges where they actually made the chain.
And after the pig iron, what happened with the remaining ore from it? Would it make other things out of it, or was there anything?
Yeah, a few things, lots of stuff was made there, but the big thing was the chain. Cool.
Thank you.
Did the British ever try to remove the chain? Did they ever try to?
With 15 forts, they could not get near it.
No.
And with all the troops, the message was the British are coming. And no, they couldn't. You're not going to put all those cannons? No. Good site, good setup. Yeah.
Did the Americans sort of tip the British off in advance to let them know there was a chain? Like in that sense, like how did the British come to find out there was a chain there?
Well, the British is the ones that showed America how to make pig iron. Because pig iron is what you take the ore, make the pig iron, because you take the impurities out of it, then you can make things from it. So that's why they showed us how to make furnaces.
No, but I'm saying, how did the British even know the chain was there?
British were all over the place. Because had come down from Canada, and they would come down the river, chain. But I'm sure the troops would have said, don't try to come here.
You kept mentioning a boom chain. What is that?
A boom is a smaller chain placed in front of the great chain. So if a ship was to come up, it would hit that and maybe ride over it because it wasn't as big, but that would rip the bottom of the ship. But the main chain would stop the ship.
About what year was it when they wanted to build the homes in Sterling Forest? About
Let's see,
the 60s?
61 years ago. Yeah.
I remember that.
Lou Heinbach, Church.
Doc, if there was already a chain at Fort Montgomery, why the chain at West Point?
The British came to Fort Montgomery and took the chain
Ah, okay,
and used it for their purpose.
okay.
So that was the end of that. They didn't have enough forts there to stop that, the British. Yeah.
So first, let me say thank you for all of your life's work
Oh,
to
you're
bring
welcome.
this historical value to our attention. I've never heard of the chain and grew up in Rockland, and I'm fascinated by this presentation.
Thank you.
I'd like to know, is the historical site a determined thing now, or is that still iffy and you're still working towards it?
Iffy.
So is there anything else that can be done to help that? Because if you did this presentation, I'm telling you, like, social media, YouTube, blah, 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 and got really some support from this, I'm sorry to say it, but that's kind of the way it goes these days, I think you would have, it wouldn't be iffy anymore, but what can be done to help you?
Well, the whole thing was the details is what People's Island wanted.
Yeah.
So we've done all of that. Now, as we weighed items, we took pictures of them. So each bucket, we took a picture of what was in each bucket. Then we have the weight of each one and the size. Now we're going to present that to People's Island. They would put that into the thing, into the report, and then they said they would then make it a National Historic Site.
Okay, so then it is
It's getting
well
close.
on its way.
We just had to do, they keep asking, do this, do that, do this, and we keep doing it, doing it. This is the last thing they said, this is the last thing we need to prove that it was the chain and the stuff that you found was the forge sites. So I've GPSed the trail.
Right.
They won't let me mark the trail yet. The park won't let me mark the trail yet. But I've GPSed it so I can walk it, and once it's a National Historic Site, then they have to mark it and open it up to the public because it's such a cool place. And when you see the art, you see the site, it's amazing.
And one other small detail, in the beginning, what does pig iron stand for? Like, why is it called pig iron?
I don't know why they made it pig iron, but it was, it was cast in a trough,
Right, I just
casting
wanted to
sand.
something to
They
do with
made a
pigs or
line.
something, but, yeah, okay. Thank you for everything.
Oh, you're welcome.
How do you get to Sterling Forest Visitor Center?
Oh. Put in your,
Just put it in GPS.
yeah, you put in Sterling Forest Visitor Center. It'll take you right to it.
Long Meadow Road.
17.
Long Meadow Road.
Doc, did the owner, the guy that owned the old property, and at one time, the owner, what was his name again? The owner of that.
Peter Townsend?
Yes. He lived in New York City. Did he even know what was going on? And did he support the British or the Americans?
Oh, no. He moved to upstate New York.
Okay.
Did he live in the Monroe area?
And then he moved to Sterling Forest. He had a house there.
Okay, he did. So he sort of supported the British in the takeover. They wanted to keep it Britain. run, or did he support Washington?
Oh, he supported America, yeah. He wanted the British out because of the way the British were treating everyone. They would just come in and say, "Oh, I like that bag, it's mine now." They weren't very nice.
So he was threatening, or he could have been executed if the British found out that his property is where they were building this thing.
That's why the forges were 2.5 miles from the furnace in a secret valley.
Okay.
And that was all top secret. So the pig iron was taken over to there. Cool.
Hi, I'm the Village of Chester historian. How would you go about getting like archaeology off the ground and actually organize the dig and get the permits and everything? Where's the place to
So
start?
first we had a file, we found an archaeological company, Strata Archaeological. We looked at things that different companies did, and then we got a permit from Bear Mountain to do the archaeological dig. And all the artifacts were then taken to the visitor center, but some of them started disappearing. But we fixed that. So it's just a wonderful thing to have a site that saved America, because that stopped the British from invading America, and New England did not become British property. They did pull out and go south and got their butt kicked, and that was the end of the revolution. And thanks for coming, folks.
Thank you. Getting back to this question about pig iron, because the internet is wonderful. It says here that pig iron gets its name from the way it was cast in molds that resembled a litter of pigs nursing on a sow. Okay, the ingots were called pigs and the runner was called a sow.
Right, the sow was along the line and off.
So that's why it was called, because it looked like that.
Cool. Ding.
See, the internet is wonderful.
Yes.
How many pieces of the original chain are in sterling form?
I think 3.